Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. You are on the Steady Coach. And today we're going to be exploring the topic of grief in the context of recovery from medically unexplained chronic dizziness and other symptoms. Whether you're dealing with PPPD, MdDS, vestibular migraine, or you're dealing with symptoms that may be partially or fully medically explained, grief is an essential component of your healing process. Now, one of the things that I see happen when people find my work is they take on board a lot of the advice and come away with the impression that they have to always have a positive mindset. And there's no question that having a positive, growth-oriented mindset is incredibly important during the recovery process. However, this does not mean bypassing or shoving aside your grief. Grief is a foundational process during chronic dizziness and other symptom recovery because you have lost something in this process, and it is natural for your brain to need to work through that in order to get to the other side. To help us figure out how to do this, I'm going to be talking today to Devorah Kur. Devorah is a professional logotherapist, a somatic experiencing practitioner, a level 3 internal family systems or IFS practitioner, a reflexologist, and a bereavement counselor. So she is incredibly well qualified to have this conversation with us. One of Devorah's specialties is working with people who are dealing with challenging illnesses, and she uses a holistic approach to help people through this process. She is also the author of Man's Search for Healing, a logotherapy approach to healing through meaning, which I will link to in the video description and the podcast description. And Devorah sees people online and in person. I will link to her details in the video description and podcast description as well. This is an incredibly important conversation, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it. So if you're here on YouTube, be sure to leave a comment letting us know. If you're not on YouTube, consider heading over to YouTube to leave us a comment. And as always, if you're on YouTube, you can also share this video, subscribe to the channel. These are very important to help me reach more people. If you're listening to this as a podcast, you can subscribe to the podcast or follow the podcast, as well as potentially leave us a review and a 5-star rating. I would greatly appreciate it if you enjoy the work that I'm doing. And now, please enjoy this conversation with Devorah Kur. Devorah, thank you so much for being here. So excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be here with you, Yonit. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Before we get started, I was wondering if you could just give a little bit of a background on yourself and how you started working with both grief and chronic illness, chronic symptoms.
Okay, well, that's really like an interesting question, and it goes back quite a few years because I used to have a career in interior design. And then in my 20s, and then my father got sick with cancer, and I became very interested in the role of the patient. And I read many, many books, specifically Dr. Bernie Siegel's books, Love, Medicine, and Miracles. That was the turning point in my career. And then I changed careers after my father passed away. I was very interested in how I could help people help themselves. And I went to study reflexology, and I worked as a reflexologist. And what happened is people would ask me and say to me, "Why do I have to have cancer? Why do I have to be sick?" And people with fertility problems would ask me, "Why can't I just have a baby? I really want one." And I was like, "I don't know. Let me work your hormone system, or let's work the immune system, and let's see what we can do to help you." And I couldn't help them with those questions, and it really bothered me. And then I was introduced to logotherapy, which is the teachings of Dr. Viktor Frankl. He's the author of Man's Search for Meaning. And this started a journey of years and years of studying logotherapy and really about how to find meaning in suffering. And he went through 4 years in the concentration camps in the Second World War, and he survived. And then after that, he wrote his book. And it was all about studying the human condition, because he was in this rare situation where it was a human experiment. Everybody was the same. No one had food. No one had clothes. No one had money. No one had names. People had numbers. No one had hair. No one had anything. They all ate the same, slept the same, worked the same. But he wanted to know, how come some did better than others? What is it? And even although he was one of the people in the experiment, he was learning for all those years he was there about the human condition. And so once I became more involved with logotherapy, I was able to help people answer those questions. And he has a beautiful saying, if we change the why me question to what now, we have a better chance of connecting to the purpose, because we don't always get answers to why me, why did this happen? No one's getting direct messages as to why things are happening. So if we can change, he says, from like a victim place of being in that stuck in the why me, and we start asking what now, for what can I do with this now that this has happened? Then we can start moving forward into dealing with it, coping with it, overcoming it in a different way. So that was very, very interesting for me to learn all of that. Yeah.
And I want to pause you here and just note something here, because I don't want to just blame social media, but it seems like there's this cultural phenomenon right now of trying to think positive or think our way out of difficult situations. And I want to emphasize, because I think you and I agree on this point, and we will certainly be talking about this more later in this conversation. When you say what now, it doesn't mean, well, okay, well, I just had this really hard thing happen and I just need to push that away and focus on the good in my life. That's not what that means.
That's not how that works at all. And actually, the analogy I like to tell people is, if you put an onion in a dark cupboard, it continues to grow. So anything we're going to stuff away somewhere that we can't look at, I call it also unfinished business. Anything we put away is going to start growing, and it's going to beg us for some attention eventually. So I don't believe I used to for many years, just put a smile on your face and everything will be okay. But that doesn't help, because if we have pain, it's our internal world speaking to us. So, through all my studies, and then when I studied somatic experiencing, that was really about like what comes up, the sensation of whatever it is, grief, anger, joy, everything wants to be felt and experienced in the body. And anything we push aside and push away, just put a smile, then where does that hurt go? Where does that pain go? And I always feel like these things then grow inside of us and eventually like spill over into anything, symptoms, illnesses. And we want to really try and give them the attention that they deserve. It's our inner world speaking. We really want to connect to it, give it some airtime.
Yes. So I see already how you mentioned somatic experiencing. I know you also have training in several other experiential modalities, like internal family systems, because I was lucky enough to get to train with you in some of those.
Yeah.
And I can see how these things then connect, because if we're just pursuing what now, and we don't have a way of working with the feelings of grief and loss that we have from a difficult experience, then it's not complete. Because as you say, the onion is then in the cupboard and we're thinking about what now, but we're not necessarily digesting the difficult experiences we've had. But if we're just digesting difficult experiences and not thinking what now, then we're not necessarily actively making meaning out of what's happening to us.
Right. And actually, I think the meaning doesn't come in the beginning. It's very hard to just all of a sudden make meaning. Meaning can be made years later or after some time, but there's steps in along the way, with any kind of loss that we need to be able to sit with, process, accept, integrate, before we can make meaning. So meaning is, I think, kind of like the final step that we get to, but it is something that offers hope for a different kind of future. And which is why then I also studied about bereavement, because loss, everyone has loss on so many different levels, age, careers, people, relationships. There's loss all around us. So there's a process before we can get to a place of making meaning with these. We need to, there's some steps and stages to go through along the way.
Okay. So, that brings me to, I think, a very important question here. So here in my work, most of the people who are listening or watching this have gone through the loss of expectations of the person they were, not necessarily of another person. So I just want to make sure we're on the same page in defining bereavement and grief to include the loss of the life that you expected, to the future you.
Absolutely. Loss can take place from it can be anything within oneself. Even menopause can be a loss of the ability to have a child, and then that's been lost. Loss is anything that can take place deep within ourselves, where we feel something is gone, something is missing, and it is worthy of being paid attention to and given some validation and felt and mourned. Anything, even if someone loses a limb, that is also needs to be mourned, and there's a whole process. And so loss is a very broad bereavement, applies to so many different things. Immigration is a loss as well. The change of career is a loss as well. I felt that when I changed careers, I had a thriving career, and then all of a sudden I was a student again, and there was a tremendous loss for me. So a loss can be any kind of stages one goes through in life. When children leave home and then there's empty nest, like there's loss. There's many losses along the way. And if we can validate them and say, you're real, I feel you, tell me about it. It's like when our inner world speaks to us, if we're feeling something, and then we can respond to it with kindness and compassion, then that part feels supported in our system, and we can help it to feel heard, to heal as well.
So, for the example that I was giving earlier, so when someone is watching this and says, I'm debilitated, I'm not the person I once was, I'm not the parent I once was, even if they're hopeful for a better future, even if they've watched a lot of my videos and say, okay, I think I'm going to overcome this and things are going to get better, it's still, what you're saying is, it's still really important to sit with and allow ourselves to feel the parts of us that are experiencing the loss and the grief over the loss.
It's so honoring and so respectful to what's happened to us if we do that, right? So sometimes we may tend to say, or minimize it, or push it aside, or play it down. But if we can really show up, there's this man, Thich Nhat Hanh, maybe you've heard of him.
Of course.
He passed away a few years ago, and he would say, like, if that feeling comes up, whatever it is, loss or jealousy, any kind of emotion comes up, and then we tend to judge it. But if we could put our hand on our heart and say, dear one, I'm listening, that is so respectful. Then, of course, if there's a change of status and someone has lost a version of themselves, or lost capabilities or abilities, or there is something to mourn. And if we jump over that step, then it's going to be like a child having a tantrum inside that has not been seen or witnessed or validated for the pain and suffering that it's going through. And when we put our hand and say, dear one, tell me what you've lost, I'm listening, then all of a sudden that part doesn't feel alienated in the system, lost somewhere deep inside. It feels heard and supported by a greater system of, even if there is hope from, say, videos they're watching of yours or something like that, and there is hope, then at least they feel in the system supported by that hope, instead of being shunned away and pushed away. And, there is something to grieve what was before is not now. And that is something that takes some time to sit with and to process and to mourn. It's a proper grieving process, and we kind of owe it to ourselves to take the time to do that.
So
And it doesn't have to be all day long also. It doesn't have to be like I do this all day, I'm consumed with it. You could set aside 10 or 15 minutes a day and just spend time really grieving for what you've lost, and then step into hope, and then step into all the other things that are there to help. But don't jump over that.
Yes.
It's more respectful when you give it some time and love and care.
Yes. Well, as I'm listening, I'm channeling the folks who are watching this or listening to this. And a lot of them are dealing with a lot of anxiety. So a question that's arising is, but Devorah, if I give myself time to grieve and I feel how bad it is, I'm going to get stuck in that and I'm going to end up in despair and I'm just going to drown in it and be overwhelmed by it. I'm never going to be able to do anything to help myself. So can you help us clarify the difference between what you're talking about and what I just described?
Right. So sometimes, actually, in somatic experiencing, if you can see on the screen, I'm making like a infinity sign. So this side is the trauma vortex, and this side is the healing vortex, and they balance each other out. But sometimes we get stuck in the trauma vortex, okay? And we need help coming out of it into the healing. So if someone has support and an environment around them that is nurturing and supportive, they can do this work and they can go and do the grieving. But sometimes some people find each time they go in there, they get sucked into this side, into that trauma, and it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And I'd recommend in places like that to get some support. Sometimes we can't do it on our by ourselves, and we need a loving, compassionate, witnessing, empathic person to hear what we've been through. And that is always helpful, to tap into a place outside of ourselves. Sometimes the loss is just too great for us to do on our own, which is why getting some help is helpful. So I do believe, like, in a healthy environment, in a supportive environment, people can work on the grief and they can be in that grief. But sometimes we need a little bit of support and some help as well to do that.
And it also sounds like what comes with the healthy supportive environment isn't just others, it's also the capacity to kind of be that nurturer yourself. So in other words, I've often called this a observer stance, or what we might call in IFS self energy, but not necessarily being in this very calm, magnanimous, all encompassing, oh, you're so sad, and I am totally able to contain all of you. But even just being able to notice the grief as something slightly separate from the observer, from the one who's noticing the grief. It seems to me what you're saying is the people who have a supportive or healthy environment are going to be more able to do that. So instead of just drowning in the grief and just being overtaken by the grief, they may be able to notice the strong sensations of grief and really feel them, but notice that there's more to them than just the grief. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
What is that?
I think that's accurate. And also, to add to that, I think a nice explanation for your listeners is that grief is like being in a wave, caught in a wave. And anyone who's swum in the sea knows that when that wave comes, the big ones, right, if it's going to hit you and you try to fight it, right, it's going to knock you right under. But if you stay with it, it will eventually carry you to the shore. So that's exactly what happens with grief, is it rises up, it grabs us in the chest, we feel constricted, like the sensations of it. So go into the sensations where it grabs you. It might feel like you're choking, or it might feel like you can't breathe and it's constricting you in your chest. Go to the sensations. Give them some time. They're there. They're real. It's reasonable that they're here based on what you're experiencing. And let it, when you are able to sit with those sensations, then it can take you to the shore. right? Then they can ease out. And when I work with people, like when something arises that's overwhelming, like it could be anything, it's something with grief, let's say, clutches them and it feels like they're choking from the pain, and we just stay with it. We don't talk through it. We don't try and push it away. We respect it by saying, here you are, my pain, my grief. I'm just feeling you. You're clutching me. You're constricting my chest, whatever you're doing. And I'm just being with you. I'm here. I'm with you. I'm with you. And then what happens naturally in the body, if we stay with the sensation of it, it will settle down. It will slowly start to dissipate, and then it will discharge. And there's many ways that the body actually can discharge, and I'll just show you a couple of ways that people can see them. The nervous system naturally will discharge for you. So, like if you get out your car and another car comes by too quickly and you get, whoa, you get a fright, right? You might feel shaky and you say, whoa, I'm shaking. That's your body taking care of you because it's getting rid of the fright. Okay? So if we sit with the grief, there's certain things that can come up, and they could be like this. It's an organic breath, which looks like this. Okay? There could be a yawn. There could be tears. There could be heat. There could be shaking. There could be burping. And there could be stomach gurgling. Any of those responses is your nervous system discharging. So for me, when I'm working with clients and someone starts yawning and they say, oh, I'm so embarrassed, I'm not tired, I say, no, for me, it's excellent. The more you yawn, the more the work is happening, right? So don't try and stop any of these discharges. If you see you shaking from the grief, let it come out. That way, you're helping your body regulate a little bit more, come back into balance and more regulation. So those are the certain of the physical symptoms you could see as a nervous system response to the grief you're feeling. Let that happen, and you will see if you sit with the grief in that way, it can't last more than 90 seconds. It can rise up so bad, and you sit with it, and then it settles down. And that happens, I've seen it hundreds and hundreds of times. And then it's like peeling the onion which we left in the dark cupboard. Slowly we're taking layer off. Then the next layer comes up a couple of hours later. And now we sit with that one. And each one, if you're in the state where you are grieving something or a lost version of yourself, it's big. It means something's big's happened to you. It deserves the kindness and the care and the compassion and the nurturing, all of that you can give it. And in that way, it will feel held and supported and will be able to heal as time goes by. And then when we can do that in this beautiful way, then it does eventually open up the new doors to find meaning. But first we have to work in that realm.
Yeah. As you're speaking, I'm feeling a little bit overcome because I've seen so many people go through this chronic dizziness in particular, but lots of other chronic symptoms, and endure these losses and just so bravely and courageously try to move on. And to me, grief is an indispensable part of being able to move on. And you can't, as you say, you can't move on without going through it.
Grief is mourning. The human heart is a tender organ, right, that gets hurt. And when we go through a process of any kind of loss, as you've mentioned, all the losses, there's an adjustment that the nervous system has to make. It just can't. There's no magic wands here. And actually, it's there's nothing wrong with the person isn't broken. They're just grieving. And actually, I feel like grieving is work. It's something you show up for. It takes courage. It's showing up and actually doing that work, wanting something different, Yeah.
Yeah. This is going to fit so nicely with how I've always thought of it. I think of grief as neuroplasticity. Like it is neuroplasticity in action. It is your brain saying it was like this and it's like this now, but we need to rewire so that it can be like this now.
That's
And
beautiful.
right?
So compassionate. Right.
Yeah. So it's,
Yeah.
but I like to use that word in particular because people here on my channel and my listening to the podcast are going to be very familiar with the idea the brain is plastic, the brain is constantly rewiring, and that's what we want in order to relieve chronic symptoms. But grief is actually part of that process. From a
Yeah.
neuroscience perspective, it's part of that process. So wouldn't we want to? I mean, grief is painful. No one finds it pleasant. So no, you don't want to experience something unpleasant. But this is what we're after. We're after allowing the brain to change in the way that it needs to change to get you to the other side. And grief is part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
Do you have any special advice for people who are specifically going through not necessarily loss of a person, which other people can see on the outside and often, oh, you've lost someone. We know what that's like. It's so hard. Is there anything special or unique that people need to think about when they're grieving the loss of something less tangible, less obvious from the outside, when they're going through chronic symptoms or chronic illness or loss of a previous version of themselves?
Mm. First thing that comes to mind for me is when people feel they're the only one going through this, there is this kind of loneliness that they feel. But if they know of others, like if there could be some kind of support group that they could join, or Facebook page or something like that, where they don't feel alone, they're the only one who's experiencing this, then I feel that is helpful, where people don't feel no one understands, no one could know. Many times, and even you see this in the highly specialized grief groups that they have. They have a group for this kind of loss and that kind of loss, and the one in this group doesn't go to that group because they don't even understand each other. But the ones there, they feel like, oh, no one's been through what I'm going through, but they've been through their own version of it and they at least understand. So sometimes what happens is, even if someone has lost a person and the people outside don't understand even their loss. So I think every loss is still taken on the individual level. Every loss is, even within a family, losing the same family member, it's felt differently by all the members. Definitely. So your loss is personal. And if you could find like-minded, or not like-minded, but similar kind of losses to what you have lost, and you could hear them, support each other, I feel that is something that is helpful. That all these groups, Alcoholics Anonymous, all of these groups about you've got something, you're not alone. That, I think, is something that helps people feel supported. So I think starting there, finding support, or going to someone who specializes in this type of thing and getting the support there. Because also hearing, you're not the only person this has happened to, right? You don't have to invent the wheel on how the healing takes place. And having said that, also, when I feel the greatest support that can be for us is ourselves. If we can get to a place where we can witness and acknowledge and be the captain of our own ship, or the conductor of our own orchestra, whatever it is, when we can be that self-witnessing presence in our own system and say, there you are, my wounded child, come and tell me about it, right? Then we can start tapping into, like you're saying, people have the courage to get up and still get through their day. That's what you said a little while back. Then we can tap into resources that we have. So also when I work with people, I don't just work on the pain and the loss and the grief and the trauma, but we work on the resources that you have, the resilience that you have, where you feel, what are the supports in your life. And they can be internal resources or external ones. You know, it could be deep inside you feel you have a good sense of humor. Are you using that? Or something on the outside, or say you like meditation. Are you doing that? Like we go through, I would work with someone to find what are your resources and how can we be implementing those? Because when we're using our resources, we're on this side now. We're in the healing side. Or is there a certain friend you have who is a little bit more empathic than the ones who say, surely by now you should be over this, or wow, it's been a long time, or wow, you're no fun, you never come out, or any comments like that. But if there are some people who are more supportive around you, are you spending time with them? Like, are you surrounding yourself with people who can support you on the journey? But the first place to start is inside. Are you the one who's showing up and supporting the part within you that is struggling? I definitely think that's the first place, and finding a group and then around you, building on your resources of what you already do know about yourself. Like Dr. Viktor Frankl, he would say, he would encourage people, let's say someone felt suicidal, they can't cope anymore. He would say, but you've got a cousin in America. Don't you want to go and see him? I'm sure you want to. You've got a daughter who managed to make it out. Don't you want to get to see them again? And we have within us the ability to rise above. You all have heard of people who have managed to stay alive till their grandson's wedding, or do things like that. So we have this kind of thing in us. We want to be able to build on those places within us to meet the struggle, to meet the difficulty, and to meet the places where we're grieving.
Yes. So much richness in what you just said. And I'm so glad that you mentioned the group support. And I was also thinking while you were saying that, gosh, I could see how it could be a fine line between receiving support and also just being sucked down into other people's despair. So there's people have to be cognizant or aware of what kind of group that they're participating in. But
absolutely,
that feeling not alone is probably why people enjoy watching the videos on my channel so much, because I've had so many people comment and say, oh my gosh, I thought I was going crazy. Like, I thought I was the only one. There's a whole YouTube channel about this. And then I have these success stories where people get better. And so people can gain hope from that. But as you say, the support is often needed as you're going through the process. And that's what I've found just so rich and beautiful about having a coaching group, because people, the magic happens when people are on one of these Zoom calls with other people going through the exact same things as they are. And you just see the relief on people's faces when they say, oh my gosh, you have trouble with that too. And you also are feeling just completely lost today. And you feel awful that you're not able to go and do this thing with your child, or, do this thing with your spouse, or go on this trip with your friends. And they just feel so validated and supported, and they can
absolutely
in that experience. Yeah. But you also mentioned being there for yourself. And I just thought that was worth emphasizing, because just in the same way, Devorah, that, if I lost someone or something, I wouldn't want you to say something like, why aren't you over it by now? People do that to themselves all the time. Why am I still grieving? I accepted that I have neural circuit dizziness or tinnitus or hyperacusis or whatever it is, or pain or chronic fatigue syndrome, and I'm going to get better. I can let go of it now. I'm done. I don't have to grieve over it anymore. That's just not how it works. You don't get to dismiss your feelings that way. They will process in their own time, but only if you allow them to have it. Right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess this is a good seg then to how does let me put it this way. It sounds like you're saying one of the things that's important about finding support in yourself and finding support in others and finding your resources is moving through the grief. But there's something else about this that can also help you find meaning in what you're going through. And that's something else I see a lot happening in the group. Like, people help others when they're going through hard times. Oh, I've been there. Here's what you can do. And you just see this little light bulb go off, like, oh, there's meaning in the suffering that I've gone through because I can now help someone else. So
That's beautiful. Yeah.
yeah,
So if you could take that, it's very hard to find meaning in something you're going through right now.
sure.
Very hard.
Yeah.
But what I always do with people is, well, obviously, firstly, I would take, like, say, a trauma history and say, okay, so this thing you mentioned when you were 12 years old, what happens when you think back to that? What did you take out of that? What did you gain? What did you learn about yourself through having that experience? Who are you today because you went through that? So if we can look through our past, and the truth of the matter is nobody lives in Disneyland, so we've all had stuff. So, and we've all learned something. It's just funny how human nature is. Nobody wakes up on like a regular Tuesday and thinks, how can I be great today? But if you're going through something challenging, then people say to you, wow, you're amazing. It's like greatness is something in us, and it only gets activated when we're going through hard stuff. So don't start on the current thing in your life. Look back maybe to something from the past and say, wow, I went through that. Wow, that was terrible at the time. I never thought I'd get through that. But actually I did. And then try and find out how. What's in me that got me through that, right? Sometimes we don't even know we have the strength or the ability to rise above these challenges, but we did. We've done it before. So we know something about ourselves because we were once in a challenge and we learned that we have that. So now we can just reignite that. I have some resiliency from that. How can I apply that now? Or how can I bring that in now? How can that help me now? Or how can I use that to encourage someone else, right? That is a place where we can start. Maybe now I can't find meaning, what this could mean for me, but oftentimes, like, if that door is closed for me now and I can't go through that door, what else could be maybe opening for me now?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I love that you're taking the pressure off that, Devorah. That's just such a good distinction to make, because some people listening to this are going to hear the stories, the success stories, or the things that I say about growth and how post-traumatic growth is ultimately what I see in a lot of people who've recovered. And that's almost one of the definitions of recovery for me. When I see people gotten better from symptoms, it's not usually just about symptoms. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I have to like feel like this is good for me, or like I feel brave right now. And what you're saying is you don't need to start there. You can start with other past experiences that have nothing to do with dizziness or symptoms, and look at the resources. I think a question you asked, a question I ask a very similar question, something like, what is it about you that allowed you to get through that one thing, or to do, or to make that one step after that difficult thing happened to you?
Yeah. There's some kind of saying which is, I didn't know how strong I was until being strong was my only option.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So sometimes we're in a situation we have to dig deep to get ourselves out of that. And when we're in that whirlpool, we might not be able to, but we look back and say, I have done this. I've done other stuff before. I'm just thinking of this when it was COVID. There was a trauma unit head of staff that was interviewed one day in one of the New York hospitals, and there have been many deaths that week, and the staff was totally overwhelmed. And the reporter had said to her, how are you coping? Like, what skills do you have to deal with this? She said, my whole life I have been gaining skills to show up to this very moment. Right? No one could have known what COVID would bring or what we would have needed to overcome it. But if we look back, each one of us has gone through hard things in our life. Each one of us has been and is gaining. Like, instead of looking at all of those things as stumbling blocks, the things that tripped us up in our life, we could look at them as stepping stones to get me to this exact point I am in my life now, struggling and suffering, but there is something deep inside of me that got me through difficult things before that I want to tap into now. How can that maybe help me now? What can I use now?
That's beautiful. So I have a question for you. So, because I hear what you're saying is tapping into those deep inner resources. And yet, I think some people might answer this question by saying things like, um, I just worked really hard and I took on even um, more pressure. And actually, that's what got me to this point. We often identify people who have these very strong inclinations towards perfectionism and conscientiousness and people pleasing. I know you're familiar with that, Arno, as being associated with developing these chronic symptoms. So often, the very things people think of as resources that got them through hard times end up being part of the complex that got them into chronic symptoms in the first place. So, how do you help people differentiate between the kinds of traits, or I don't even think of them as traits, I think of them as strategic, but the strategies or parts or protectors or defensive mechanisms, differentiate between those things that may be increasing the pressure on themselves versus those deep inner resources that really carried them through a hard time and got them to where they are today?
So you mentioned something there about people pleasing, like that could be a character trait that helped people get through a situation.
Yes.
So let's look at that for a moment. So let's say a child is in a situation in an unhappy home and the parents are fighting all the time and the child is too scared to be the cause of the fights. So it's petrified that and rightfully so. So let's say that child then is overwhelmed by that situation, and then a part can develop in that child says, you know what, if I just do everything daddy says and everything mommy says, then I will just make peace and then I won't be the problem. And that is really an adaptive way of thinking for such a young age. It really saves the child in that age. And that is really needed at the time when the system is overwhelmed. The problem with parts like that is that as the person grows up, when those parts are now when you're 15 and when you're 25 and 45 and 65, those parts are maladaptive now. They were very adaptive at a time when it was for your survival, for your need to get through very overwhelming situations. So we need to be able to go in and look, and this is where internal family systems is so beautiful that we studied together, Unit. It's so beautiful and so respectful of going to that little wounded child who took on that role of being a people pleaser. And back then, it was needed, it was necessary, it was essential. But today it's not. And to help it unburden what it carried back then, any beliefs it might have carried way back then because of that role it was in. And we help that young part to heal. Then it doesn't need to be doing in the system today anymore like it was doing back then. So I think working with these parts in such, why I absolutely love internal family systems is because it is so gentle, it's so kind, it's so compassionate, and it's so healing. It goes and says, there's nothing wrong with your people-pleasing part. It is actually something that you need to be grateful for. It got you through something very difficult, but it's not working for you now. And how can we help to alleviate it, unburden it from what's carrying and healing the part that was so petrified behind that? That's a beautiful way to work.
So what I'm hearing you say is we can acknowledge the resources or the parts of us and the traits that they took on as things that helped us get through difficult times. It doesn't necessarily mean that we want to continue using that particular strategy moving forward. We can be understanding and compassionate and really recognize the greatness, the adaptive greatness of parts like this or strategies like this, while also looking at them as an adult and saying, or at least asking ourselves the question, is this adaptive for my life right now? Is this how I want to be moving forward? Mm-hmm. Is that, would you say that's a good way of explaining that for people who aren't as familiar?
Yeah.
Which really brings us to the idea of post-traumatic growth. So I was wondering if you might be able to explain what that is for people who aren't familiar.
Okay. So post-traumatic growth, I think, like, came out of the almost like the opposite of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, that they have people experiencing prolonged trauma after an event and can't come back to themselves. So post-traumatic growth is actually when we can look at the difficulties going through a difficult situation and we can grow from that. Right? So, like I said before, looking at something you're in right now, it's very hard to say, how am I going to grow from this? Right? And actually, the internet is filled with stories. And if you want encouragement ever, go and watch the Paralympics, because that's post-traumatic growth, right? There's a marvelous movie on it's either called Phoenix Rising or Rising Phoenix. I'd recommend everyone to go and watch that. It's about the Paralympics, and it's about people who are born or become disabled or lose abilities or lose arms or legs or all sorts of horrible things that are now competing in the Paralympics. So this is a perfect example of post-traumatic growth. When you look at something that is there and it doesn't end things for you, where there is, okay, this door has closed, and because of this, these doors are opened. Right? Mm-hmm. That is an opportunity to look with different eyes, to maybe take a step to the side and get a different perspective and see, wow, that was the worst thing that happened to me. But actually, like if even if I look at my story, I had a beautiful career as an interior designer. I was so happy and fulfilled and creative and had my own business. I was living my life perfectly. And then disaster struck and my dad got sick, and that opened a new door for me. And actually it was the greatest gift he could have given me on his transition out of this world, is he planted that seed through him being ill. He made healing available for me to give to others. And I'm very grateful for that. And that, I would say, is growth that I've had through the loss of my dad. And we are able to find meaning through loss or difficulty or anything. You hear of people who get fired from a job and then the next thing they're somewhere else in a new career or something like that. Like, it can be found anywhere, and it is done with compassion on the inside and acknowledging that mourning process. I could never have got to that point where I remember when it was 21 years after my dad died, and I felt to myself, I just turned 21, 21, the key to the door, you're an adult now. I felt like I'd grown up 21 years, even though I was already 40, by that stage, or even a little bit more. I had felt like something grew in me to overcome this difficulty, where I could just say, wow, actually my dad stepped out so that I could step up into my life, because he had been very involved in my life, and I'd always been a bit timid, a bit scared, didn't do anything without dad, right? And him not being there, and I only saw this like after 21 years, I was like, wow, I've really matured. I've come to a place where, yeah, it's okay. He did, there was growth around losing him. And I think it doesn't just have to be post-traumatic growth, isn't just about, losing a person. I had I think, Yonita, I told you 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago, I had a terrible accident where I broke my neck. I fell on my head, and actually, it was quite ironic, because I had already a handful of tools what to work with. I was already a trauma therapist. I was already studied somatic experiencing, because I could help myself. And one of the first things I thought was, when the doctor told me my neck was broken, like, she was very callous, and she just said, "You're lucky you didn't die. You're lucky you're not paralyzed, and your neck is broken, and don't move." 4 little sentences. She told me like that. And the first thing that I thought to myself was, I'm gonna talk about this, and I'm gonna teach people about how I got through this. I thought to myself, I have no clue how I'm gonna get through it, but I know I'm gonna help people because of this. So already for me, and this is years of working with people, like now I had to walk the talk. It was something inside that wanted to be there. And of course, there was plenty of crying along the way and suffering and pain and, the disability that came with a 6-month recovery. Thank God, a total healing. And there can be growth anywhere. There can be growth with anywhere. If we just start to like plant that little seed, like if I could give you anything, it's like just to plant that seed of hope, that out of this, like we're not going through this for no reason. Something is going to come about from this, even if it is one day we can be compassionate to someone else who's going through it, or anything that we could possibly learn from this is something that this has given us now that we can then use to make our life that much better, or other people's lives better.
Yes.
Right? Yes. So something doesn't have to break us, right? Like I felt like my neck was broken, but I was not. And I feel that sometimes when we're going through difficulties and challenges, there's an invitation in that for us, like maybe even an invitation to greatness, like to see, who are you? Like, can you show up? Where are you? Can you show up to this life that you've been given, this challenge you've been given, and can we use it to springboard us to that next place? And that's post-traumatic growth. And sometimes it doesn't work when you're in it. And I can tell you for those first few months when I was like I had a cage around me, sometimes it felt like a cage, and sometimes it felt like loving hands, right? Some was holding me, and sometimes was, caging me. And when I could just sit with that, every time I felt like there's a cage on me, and I said, oh, Devorah, this is so hard. And I could just be with the pain. Then there were other times when I felt, oh, thank God this is helping me because I can't hold my own head up. So when we can just acknowledge, that's what I was saying earlier, when you can be with that pain, that suffering, not, are you still whining about this? No, this is all right now, and I'm going to take the time to be kind to myself. That's how we slowly start to move to the place of, okay, I've acknowledged, now I can, build myself up maybe a little bit from that.
Yes. And that
being
is how
real.
you do it without bypassing. That's how you
do we don't bypass.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just, I just love, you described that beautifully. I'm just emphasizing it again and again because I hear people on social media talking about this, and I know people who are dealing with chronic dizziness and other symptoms are desperately trying to get information to try to get better. We do not get to the place that you're describing of growth and acceptance by thinking positive or manifesting what you want or imagining things going well all the time. Not to say that those are practices that are terrible.
Yeah, don't stop doing those things.
Right, you can
don't stop them.
Right, but we can we have to also work with our pain in order to get.
It's work. It is work. All of this is work, and yeah.
Well, before we finish, I was wondering if you might give us some ideas about what skills, traits, characteristics, this is really the $1 million question. What leads someone to end up in post-traumatic growth? Like what helps someone get to that point versus ending up in post-traumatic stress and constantly fearing symptoms coming back, or constantly fearing illness coming back, or being terrified of losing another loved one? What gets someone to the place where they feel like they've moved through it and grown from it?
Yeah. Wow, it's like a $1 million question.
It is the $1 million question.
I think number one is time. And number two, I think, is effort and energy. You have to work at this. It's not going to just go away. It's work. It takes work, and it's so respectful if you can do that. And for me also, it happens in the nervous system. Like I showed you that if we can notice the sensations in our body, because that is where trauma is. I'll just show you, there's three parts. This is the brain and the spinal cord. So this is the cognitive brain where all our thoughts are. This is the limbic brain where all the emotions are. And this is the reptilian brain, which is our survival brain, which is asking a big question. Is she safe? Is he safe? Is he going to be alive? And it's taking care of us. And this brain works on sensation. So when you feel grief and your throat starts closing, or you feel nervous and there's a knot in your stomach, or if you feel your chest is closing and you can't breathe, okay, that is your body talking to you. And what I'm saying is, don't try and put a smile on your face. Don't try and wish it was gone. Don't talk through it, but take a moment. I always say to my clients, just take a moment and let's just notice that pain now, that sensation in your body. If you can notice, wow, closing up here, my jaw is angry, and you can just sit with the anger for a moment, it will pass. And that is that is the work, because we start moving through and processing and allowing our nervous system to discharge and slowly dissipate all those sensations inside of us. It can't be thought away. And it's just not about only the feelings. It has to be worked on a level of sensation. That's why I feel somatic experiencing is crucial for this type of work. When we miss someone, or we're longing for a time in our life when we were vibrant and healthy, and we feel that as a pain in our heart, take a moment to put your hand there and just feel the pain. And then the pain feels felt. It says, she saw me. I can settle down a bit now. Right? And that is how I see, and I've experienced for myself. I was tested when we can give ourselves that validation. This sucks, okay? And I'm with you. I'm holding the part that is struggling. I show up for that part. It's not all of me, because there's another part of me that gets me out of bed in the morning. So it's not all of me. To break it up into the different parts. Where is the part that is suffering? It's not all of me, because there's another part that shows up to be a daughter or a son or a husband or whatever it is. We have all different roles. But sometimes we feel all consumed. So we want to create also a little bit of distance when we feel that we've totally blended and taken over by this I'm suffering, right? And if we could start maybe using a new language, like, there's a part of me that's really suffering now. Then we start creating a bit of distance, and we can show up for the part, listen to the part, say, tell me where it hurts. Tell me what was so hard. I'm listening. Then we can bring all of ourselves. We can bring the courageous part. We can bring all of ourselves to help that part. When we are consumed in it, then we can't really work with it. We need to create a little bit of distance and notice that this is a part of me, not all of me.
Okay. So it sounds like, you didn't say this explicitly, but I'm hearing this, and I'm going to use my own words here. It sounds like, from your experience, the nervous system wants to heal. It naturally will move toward healing if we can be with our pain and work at being with the pain and work at cultivating our resources as we can. And
it will keep bringing us opportunities to work at it.
Yes, it will.
It will keep bringing us reminders. And all it's saying is, please help me heal. And it comes up as a new wave. Please help me heal. And if we can show up for it, then we've taken off another layer of the onion.
Yes. Beautiful way to look at it. Beautiful way to look at it. Wow. Okay. So anything else you want to share, or any other thoughts you have for people dealing with chronic illness and chronic symptoms? Because I know you have a lot of experience with that group of folks.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd love to just offer, I don't know if you mention about the book that I've written. I feel it's a wonderful self-help tool that can help people struggling. It's many kinds of illnesses that I've worked with people. There's examples in the book. There's different chapters, how to find meaning, what is meaning, all sorts of different chapters that can help, and documented a chapter on post-traumatic growth, and then the chapter on how I broke my neck, because the book was actually completed before the accident happened. So
Wow.
It happened at the same time. I had to include that. So I feel it's a resource. You don't have to try and invent new things. There's wonderful encouragement in the book to help you on your process. And my blessing is that you've been able to take some kind of nuggets out of this discussion Yonette and I have had tonight, that just feels so precious, that you can take something to be a little bit more kinder to your internal world and be that support that it's longing for you to be for it, and that there's been something of hope. I love to be like the hope merchant, just encouraging that, showing up and doing the work, or finding someone to help you do this work, and partnering with someone, finding a group or support, that you will feel less alone and more encouragement to move forward in the best way possible, dealing with the difficulties that you are going through.
Yes. Thank you. And I will put the name of the book and a link to your preferred means of purchasing it, maybe Amazon or what have you, in the description of the podcast and the video. So please, folks, if you're interested, please look for that. And also in the book, we didn't get to this in this conversation. For those of you who are curious to know a little bit more about the role of faith in post-traumatic growth, there's a lot more in the book about that. And you mention a lot of mind-body stuff in the book. It's actually very compatible with all the things that we talk about here on my channel and in our podcast. So very, very good resource for those of you who want more information on what we were talking about today. All right. Wonderful. Well, Devorah, this was just delightful. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to all of you for listening, for watching, tuning in. If you have any questions or comments for me or for Devorah, please drop them in the comment section below if you're on YouTube. If you're listening to this as a podcast, please join the conversation on YouTube. I love hearing from you. And as always, if you could like the video, share it with someone in your life you think would enjoy it. And of course, please subscribe to the channel. These things help me reach more people. Thank you, everyone. And especially thanks to you, Devorah, for being here.
Thanks, Yonette. It was wonderful spending this time with you and all of you out there as well.